It began without monuments, without armies, without empires. Yet for over 7 centuries, it was one of the most expansive, sophisticated, and enigmatic civilizations of the ancient world. Long before the rise of the pyramids in Egypt or the great temples of Mesopotamia, the people of the Indus Valley were building cities with straight streets, advanced drainage systems, and standardized weights, across a region larger than either of their better-known contemporaries. But there's no evidence of kings, no grand palaces, and no deciphered texts to tell us what they believed or how they ruled. Who were these people who built such orderly cities, yet left behind so few clues about their rulers or religion? How did they thrive in such a vast and varied landscape, from the arid plains of Baluchistan to the fertile banks of the Indus River? And why, after centuries of stability, did their urban world quietly dissolve? This is the entire story of the Indus Valley civilization. Let's begin. The story of the Indus Valley civilization does not begin with grand cities or monumental architecture. It begins in quiet valleys, small farming villages, and slow but steady human adaptation. Thousands of years before the emergence of urban centers like Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro, early communities were already shaping the foundations of what would later become one of the world's first great civilizations. Archaeological evidence places the beginning of this story as far back as 7,000 years before the Common Era. At that time, much of South Asia was still sparsely populated, with human groups living in small bands and subsisting on hunting, gathering, and simple forms of agriculture. Among the most important sites from this early period is Mehrgarh, located near the Bolan Pass in what is now western Pakistan. It stands as one of the oldest known farming villages in South Asia and gives us a direct window into the Neolithic roots of the Indus world. The settlement at Mehrgarh was first occupied around 7,000 years before the Common Era. It began as a modest village with mud brick houses, simple granaries, and open areas for herding animals. The people who lived there practiced early forms of agriculture, cultivating barley and wheat, and domesticating animals such as sheep, goats, and cattle. This shift from a mobile, foraging lifestyle to a more settled, agricultural one marks one of the most important transitions in human history. With farming came food surpluses, and with surpluses came population growth and social complexity. The villagers at Mehrgarh were not isolated. They traded with neighboring regions, exchanged tools and ornaments, and developed a growing knowledge of craft and material culture. By the 6th millennium before the Common Era, they were producing pottery, initially simple and handmade, later decorated with geometric patterns. The spread of pottery and other tools suggests not only innovation, but also increasing contact between distant communities across the region. In time, the people of Mehrgarh began to develop more sophisticated techniques. They experimented with copper, used drills for making ornaments, and crafted figurines from terracotta. Some of these figurines depict human forms, often women, perhaps connected to fertility practices, though their exact purpose remains uncertain. Still, their presence shows the beginnings of symbolic thought and social expression, elements that would later become central in the mature Indus cities. As millennia passed, the settlement at Mehrgarh expanded. By the 5th millennium before the Common Era, it had grown to include storage facilities, large houses, and specialized craft areas. Its long-term occupation, lasting over 3,000 years, shows a continuity that is rare in the ancient world, yet it was not a static community. Across centuries, architectural styles changed, burial practices evolved, and new technologies were introduced. These changes reflect a dynamic society responding to both internal innovation and external contact. Mehrgarh is important not because it was unique, but because it represents a broader pattern. Similar developments were taking place in other regions of South Asia. Sites like Kili Gul Muhammad, Rana Gundai, and Gumla, though less well studied, offer parallel evidence of early agriculture, craft production, and increasing complexity. Together, they show that long before the emergence of cities, people across the region were experimenting with new ways of living. One of the most important features of these early societies was their connection to rivers. Even before the full development of irrigation systems, proximity to water sources was crucial. Rivers like the Bolan, the Ghaggar-Hakra, and eventually the Indus itself provided water for crops, supported animal herding, and created natural corridors for trade and communication. Over time, the patterns of settlement shifted toward these river systems, laying the groundwork for what would become an urban civilization built around water management and agricultural planning. By the 4th millennium before the Common Era, the cultures of the region had grown more complex. Settlements became larger and more numerous. Pottery styles became more diverse and regionally distinct. Communities began using copper tools more frequently, indicating a gradual movement toward the Bronze Age. At the same time, long-distance trade intensified. Artifacts found in sites across Baluchistan and the Indus Valley show the exchange of raw materials like lapis lazuli, carnelian, and shell. This trade would become a crucial part of the mature Indus economy. One of the major transformations during this period was the increasing use of planned settlement layouts. In sites like Kot Diji and Remon-Deri, archaeologists have uncovered early examples of grid-like street planning, defensive walls, and platforms that may have supported public or communal structures. These features do not yet indicate full-scale urbanism, but they do show an emerging interest in spatial organization, collective labor, and community planning. There are no known written records from this Neolithic period, and as such, much of what we understand comes from material remains. Burials, in particular, offer insight into social structure. At Mehrgarh, some graves include tools, ornaments, and ceramics, suggesting differences in social status or roles. Others are simple, with few offerings. These differences suggest the beginnings of social differentiation, even if the society remained relatively egalitarian compared to later hierarchical states. Agriculture also continued to evolve. Crops were diversified to include pulses and oilseeds. Irrigation systems, while still simple, began to appear in some regions, particularly in more arid zones where water had to be carefully managed. The domestication of zebu cattle, a species well suited to the South Asian climate, further improved agricultural productivity and transport. This long Neolithic era, stretching from around 7,000 to 3,300 years before the Common Era, set the stage for everything that followed. It provided the technological base, farming, pottery, metallurgy, upon which cities could later be built. It also fostered regional cultures and identities that would later be integrated into the wider Indus civilization. Most importantly, it showed that human communities in South Asia had already mastered the art of adaptation, using their environment, their tools, and their social networks to build stable and enduring ways of life. As the Neolithic foundations of the Indus Valley civilization matured, they gradually gave rise to a patchwork of distinct but interconnected regional cultures. Between the 5th and the 4th millennium before the Common Era, the vast expanse of northwestern South Asia saw the emergence of multiple communities that began to exhibit unique styles of pottery, architectural features, and craft traditions. These developments were not yet part of a unified civilization, but they represent the early stages of regional complexity, an essential phase before the emergence of urban society. One of the clearest markers of these early cultures is their pottery. In archaeology, pottery often serves as a fingerprint of culture, revealing not just aesthetic preferences, but also technological development and trade connections. Across what is now eastern Pakistan and western India, distinctive ceramic traditions appeared. Among the most important were the Amri, Kot Diji, and Hakra cultures, named after key archaeological sites where these artifacts were first discovered. The Amri culture flourished primarily in the lower Sindh region, near the western edge of the Indus River. It is best known for its distinctive red and buff-colored pottery, often painted with simple geometric motifs. The settlement patterns in Amri sites suggest organized habitation with mud brick houses, hearths, and areas for craft production. Amri also shows evidence of early fortification walls, which may have been built for protection or to demarcate different parts of the settlement. This implies a growing concern with social boundaries and possibly emerging social hierarchies. Further north, the Khat-Diji culture developed in what is now the Khairpur district of Sindh. The site of Khat-Diji itself offers striking evidence of cultural advancement. Its lower levels show a pre-Harappan occupation, while the upper levels include fortified structures with towers and bastions. These defensive features are among the earliest known examples of planned fortifications in South Asia. The presence of such structures suggests organized labor and leadership, indications of increasing social complexity. The Khat-Diji culture is also noted for its refined black-on-red painted pottery and its use of copper tools, marking a further step toward the Bronze Age. To the east, in the regions now encompassing Rajasthan and parts of Haryana, the Hakra culture began to flourish. Named after the dry riverbed of the Ghaggar Hakra, this culture presents a different set of archaeological features. The Hakra sites are typically small rural settlements, but they are numerous and widely spread, indicating a dense population base. Pottery from Hakra sites is often plain or lightly incised, though some examples show early attempts at decoration. Importantly, Hakra sites show the earliest known use of ceramic bangles and fired clay tokens, items that may have had social or administrative functions. Although each of these cultures, Amri, Khat-Diji, and Hakra, developed with regional characteristics, they were not isolated. There is strong evidence of interaction and exchange among them. Similar types of beads, tools, and pottery decorations have been found across multiple regions, indicating movement of goods and ideas. This growing web of connections would become crucial in the later unification of these regions under the broader Indus Valley civilization. The role of craft specialization also expanded during this period. In addition to pottery, people began producing more advanced beads, tools, and ornaments. Stone tools became more varied, and copper became more commonly used, especially for making small blades and chisels. These tools, along with the continued domestication of animals and use of the plow, helped improve agricultural productivity. Surpluses likely supported emerging craft specialists who no longer needed to produce their own food. By the middle of the 4th millennium before the Common Era, many settlements showed signs of social stratification. Some houses were larger than others, and certain graves contained more elaborate goods. These patterns suggest the rise of local elites who may have controlled resources or coordinated collective labor. While there is still no evidence of kings or states, the seeds of political authority were being sown. Water management also began to take on new importance. In regions where rainfall was unpredictable or rivers seasonal, early forms of irrigation and water storage appeared. Sites like Kalibangan in Rajasthan, for example, show evidence of planned streets and possibly the earliest known plowed fields in South Asia. The alignment of these fields and the development of bunds and channels indicate organized agricultural planning, likely overseen by community leaders or emerging administrative structures. Alongside these practical advancements, symbolic and ritual activity also began to evolve. Small terracotta figurines, often interpreted as mother goddesses, became more common. These figurines were usually handmade and feature exaggerated feminine features, possibly linked to fertility rituals or ancestral worship. While their exact meaning remains unclear, they reflect the growing role of ritual and symbolism in community life. One especially intriguing aspect of this period is the slow but visible trend toward urban planning. While no true cities existed yet, some larger settlements began to adopt organized layouts. Ramandari, located in present-day Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, is a prime example. This site, dating to the late 4th millennium before the Common Era, exhibits grid-patterned streets, central platforms, and clear residential zones. It stands as one of the earliest known examples of planned settlement in South Asia. Trade routes continued to expand, linking the regional cultures of the Indus Valley to communities in present-day Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. Items such as turquoise, lapis lazuli, and marine shells from the Arabian Sea began appearing in inland settlements, suggesting the development of long-distance exchange networks. These networks would later become vital for the economic strength of the mature Indus cities. The increasing interaction between regions also led to a slow process of cultural convergence. Pottery styles began to share more common elements. Settlement layouts became more uniform. Standardized tools and ornaments spread across wider areas. These trends suggest a gradual movement toward shared cultural norms, possibly facilitated by trade, intermarriage, or seasonal migrations. It is important to note that none of these changes were uniform or immediate. Development occurred unevenly across regions, with some areas advancing faster than others. However, by the end of the 4th millennium before the Common Era, the groundwork for urbanization was firmly in place. Fortified settlements, organized craft production, trade networks, water management systems, and symbolic culture, all the necessary components for urban society, were already emerging across the landscape. The rise of regional cultures in this era represents a crucial transitional phase. It marks the shift from isolated village life to complex, interconnected communities. These cultures did not yet form a single civilization, but they were laying the essential groundwork for one. In their pottery, architecture, trade, and symbols, we see the early outlines of a shared cultural identity that would soon stretch across the entire Indus basin. As the 4th millennium before the Common Era gave way to the 3rd, the cultural and technological foundations laid during the Neolithic and regional development periods began to bear striking new fruit. What had previously been a landscape of distinct regional cultures, Amri, Kotdiji, Hakra, and others, now began to shift toward a more unified, expansive, and complex pattern of social life. This phase, known as the early Harappan period, marked the true dawn of urbanism in the Indus Valley region. Between 3,300 and 2,600 years before the Common Era, dozens of settlements across the northwestern subcontinent began to evolve from modest villages into larger, more systematically organized towns. This was not yet the full urban glory of the mature Indus cities like Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro, but it was a critical transitional stage. The seeds of large-scale planning, civic coordination, and long-distance exchange were now actively being cultivated. One of the most significant indicators of this shift was the change in settlement architecture and layout. Several early Harappan sites reveal deliberate planning. Towns were no longer spreading haphazardly. Instead, they show increasing attention to grid-like street layouts, segregated residential and industrial zones, and the use of raised platforms, likely to protect against seasonal flooding. These platforms, constructed with layered mud bricks, show both forethought and coordination, suggesting the presence of decision-making bodies or collective planning. At sites such as Kotdiji in Sindh and Rehman-Deri in present-day Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the remains of defensive walls from this period are among the earliest examples of organized urban fortification in South Asia. These walls were often built with standardized mud bricks and reinforced with bastions or watchtowers. Their purpose was likely multifunctional, defensive against threats, but also symbolic, marking boundaries and asserting control. The growth of towns also saw a notable increase in craft specialization and standardization. Pottery styles became more refined and began to display motifs that would persist into the mature Indus period. Black-on-red painted wares, often featuring geometric or naturalistic designs, became widespread. The uniformity of ceramic types across large areas suggests growing cultural integration and possibly centralized production or shared stylistic norms. Bead making, a craft already practiced in earlier times, now reached new levels of sophistication. Using materials such as carnelian, steatite, and lapis lazuli, artisans crafted beads that were not only used locally but also traded over long distances. The production of these items required specialized knowledge, including the use of drills and heating techniques. The locations of craft workshops, often set apart from domestic areas, indicate growing economic complexity and early forms of industrial zoning within settlements. Metallurgy also progressed significantly during this time. The use of copper, while still relatively limited in earlier centuries, now became more widespread. Small tools, such as chisels, knives, and awls, were produced using techniques like casting and annealing. These tools enabled more efficient woodworking, masonry, and craft production, further enhancing economic productivity. Perhaps most indicative of increasing social complexity was the development of administrative practices. Clay seal impressions and tokens, though still rare in this phase, began to appear. These early seals often featured geometric motifs or simple animals, foreshadowing the more elaborate iconography of the mature Indus period. Their function may have been tied to trade or record-keeping, marking ownership or managing goods in transit. The growth of trade networks during this time played a pivotal role in transforming these societies. Evidence shows expanding contact with regions to the west, including the Iranian Plateau and southeastern Afghanistan. Goods such as lapis lazuli from Badakhshan, turquoise from Iran, and marine shells from the Arabian Sea moved through early Harappan settlements. These exchanges not only enriched local economies, but also introduced new ideas, techniques, and social models. Some of the best documented trade routes from this period passed through the Bolan and Khyber passes, linking the Indus Valley to Mesopotamia and the Iranian Plateau. These paths would eventually become highways of commerce in the Bronze Age. Already by the end of the early Harappan period, signs of foreign goods and cultural influence were becoming visible in Indus settlements. A striking development in this period is the emergence of early writing or protoscript. Though not yet fully formed into the classic Indus script of the mature phase, certain pottery shards and seal fragments from sites like Kalibangan and Harappa display incised symbols. These symbols are not merely decorative. Their placement and repetition suggest they served communicative or record-keeping purposes. Whether they represented ownership, identity, or quantity remains uncertain, but they point to an increasing need for symbolic communication, likely tied to expanding trade and administration. In parallel with technological and administrative developments, agricultural systems also became more complex and regionally adapted. In the arid regions of Baluchistan and Rajasthan, farmers developed water conservation techniques, including bunding and canal irrigation. In more fertile areas, such as the Punjab and Sindh, they expanded the cultivation of barley, wheat, lentils, and possibly cotton. The appearance of cotton, in particular, is a noteworthy development. Later Indus communities would be among the earliest in the world to spin and weave cotton cloth, an innovation that would become central to South Asia's textile legacy. Social organization during the early Harappan period also began to shift. Burial practices became more varied. Some graves included multiple bodies, others had grave goods like ornaments, pots, and tools. These differences suggest emerging distinctions in social status or roles within the community. However, there is still no evidence of royal tombs, large temples, or monuments dedicated to individual rulers. Power, if it existed in a centralized form, left behind few visible symbols. Religious and ritual practices in this period remain largely speculative, but certain clues offer hints. Some settlements contain fire altars, small brick structures that appear to have been used for controlled burning. These may have been used in domestic rituals or community ceremonies. Small figurines, especially of women and animals, also continue to appear. These could represent deities, ancestors, or symbolic tokens of fertility and prosperity. As the early Harappan period drew to a close around 2600 years before the Common Era, the stage was set for the next dramatic transformation. Urban settlements had become more numerous and more densely populated. Infrastructure was improving, crafts and trade were thriving, and the beginnings of administration, planning, and symbolic systems were in place. By the middle of the third millennium before the Common Era, the scattered towns and regional cultures of the Indus Valley entered a transformative phase. The settlements that had grown steadily in size and complexity now gave rise to full-fledged cities. This shift was neither accidental nor sudden. It was the product of centuries of social evolution, technological innovation, and increasing coordination. What emerged was not just one or two urban centers, but an entire network of cities, towns, and villages spread across a vast territory. Two of the most prominent cities from this period are Harappa, located in present-day Punjab in Pakistan, and Mohenjo-Daro, situated further south in Sindh. These sites have become the most widely recognized symbols of the Indus Valley civilization, not because they were necessarily the largest or most powerful, but because they were among the first to be excavated and studied in modern times. Their archaeological remains offer the clearest window into the rise of mature urbanism in the region. Harappa had already existed in earlier phases as a fortified settlement, but around 2,600 years before the Common Era, it underwent significant expansion and reorganization. Its streets were laid out in a grid pattern, intersecting at right angles and dividing the city into clearly defined blocks. This was not simply a matter of aesthetics. It reflected a high level of planning and civic coordination. Drainage systems were integrated into the street layout, with covered brick channels running alongside or beneath the roads, carrying wastewater away from homes and public buildings. Mohenjo-Daro, likely founded slightly later than Harappa, but developed with equal sophistication, followed a similar pattern. Its urban plan included wide streets, residential zones, public wells, and granaries. The city was divided into two major areas, a raised citadel on the western side and a lower town to the east. The citadel housed large public structures, including what archaeologists refer to as the Great Bath, a massive brick-lined water tank that may have had ritual or communal purposes. What distinguishes these cities is not just their size, but the uniformity of their design. Across hundreds of kilometers, cities like Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Kalibangan, and others shared a similar urban layout, use of standardized bricks, and comparable civic features. This level of cultural integration over such a wide area is remarkable, especially considering that no evidence of a single ruling dynasty or central political authority has been found. One of the most significant aspects of this period is the widespread use of standardized baked bricks. These bricks followed consistent dimensions, typically in a ratio of 1:2:4, and were used in the construction of homes, public buildings, and drainage systems. The adoption of this standard not only demonstrates technical knowledge, but also suggests a system of regulation or shared practice that crossed regional boundaries. Another notable feature of the great cities was their emphasis on sanitation and water management. Both Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro had extensive drainage systems, with individual homes connected to larger public sewers. Many houses had private wells and bathrooms, an indication of the importance placed on hygiene and domestic comfort. This level of infrastructure would not be matched in many parts of the world for thousands of years. The cities also show evidence of sophisticated food storage and distribution. Large granaries, built on elevated platforms with air vents to prevent spoilage, were constructed near citadel areas. These facilities suggest that the cities managed surplus grain at a communal level, possibly to buffer against crop failure or to supply urban populations who did not farm directly. Markets and workshops were another essential component of city life. In various sectors of the cities, archaeologists have uncovered clusters of craft production, bead making, shell working, metalworking, and pottery. These zones were often spatially distinct from residential quarters, pointing to early forms of economic zoning. The presence of standardized weights and measures, often made from chert and marked with regular intervals, supports the idea of regulated commerce and trade. The use of seals also became widespread during this phase. These small, carved objects, usually made from steatite, featured animal motifs and short sequences of symbols that are believed to represent names, titles, or goods. While the Indus script remains undeciphered, the consistency and distribution of these seals indicate their role in administration, trade, or personal identification. Many seals were found in storerooms, workshops, or near granaries, suggesting their function in managing goods and ownership. Despite the high level of organization, the cities of the Indus Valley do not show the monumental palaces or temples found in other early civilizations like Mesopotamia or Egypt. This absence has sparked considerable debate. It may suggest a different kind of social order, one less centralized or less reliant on visible displays of state power. Alternatively, perishable materials like wood may have been used for elite structures that have not survived. Either way, The material culture points to a society with complex organization, but without the overt symbols of monarchy or centralized religion. Social life in the cities was diverse and dynamic. Residential buildings ranged from modest one-room dwellings to larger multi-room houses with courtyards, private wells, and multiple stories. This variation suggests differences in wealth or social status, though the general lack of ostentation points to a relatively egalitarian urban culture. Public spaces such as wells, streets, and the Great Bath were accessible to many and indicate a shared civic life. While Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro are the best known, they were part of a much larger urban network. Other major sites like Dholavira in Gujarat, Kalibangan in Rajasthan, and Rakhigarhi in Haryana show similar features of planning and infrastructure. These cities, along with hundreds of smaller settlements, formed an interconnected system that stretched from the Himalayas in the north to the Arabian Sea in the south, and from eastern Iran in the west to the Ganges-Yamuna divide in the east. This geographic spread, covering over 1 million square kilometers, makes the Indus Valley civilization one of the largest of the ancient world. The coordination required to maintain such a system without visible evidence of centralized rule is one of its most fascinating features. It raises important questions about the nature of governance, cooperation, and cultural cohesion in the ancient world. As the great cities emerged, so too did a shared identity, a visual, technological, and economic language that connected people across distances. This identity was not enforced by empire or conquest, but appears to have developed through trade, tradition, and mutual benefit. By the middle of the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, the Indus Valley civilization had reached a remarkable state of maturity. Urban planning was no longer limited to a handful of cities. Instead, a fully developed system of interconnected settlements had spread across the region, unified by shared architectural styles, administrative practices, and economic frameworks. This period, known as the mature Harappan phase, marks the high point of the civilization's cultural, technological, and political achievements. Between 2500 and 2400 years before the Common Era, the Indus world grew in both scale and sophistication. Over 1,000 settlements have been identified across the greater Indus region, ranging from massive cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro to smaller towns, fortified centers, and rural villages. These sites spanned what is now Pakistan, western and northwestern India, and parts of eastern Iran and southern Afghanistan. This extensive territorial spread placed the Indus Valley among the largest of the early Old World civilizations, rivaling its contemporaries in Mesopotamia and Egypt in terms of geographic scope. Despite this vast scale, the mature Harappan sites exhibit a surprising degree of cultural consistency. Everywhere, the same standardized brick dimensions, urban grid layouts, and civic infrastructure appear. Pottery styles, weights and measures, seal motifs, and even the elusive script reflect a coherent cultural system. Such uniformity suggests a high level of coordination, if not by a single central government, then by shared values, practices, and perhaps a powerful network of elite administrators and merchants who maintained common standards across regions. One of the key features of the mature Harappan period is the proliferation of medium and large urban centers. While Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro remained important, new cities like Dholavira, Rakhigarhi, Lothal, and Ganeriwala rose in prominence. These cities were not carbon copies of one another. Each adapted its layout and structure to its specific environment. For example, Dholavira, located in the arid region of Kutch in present-day Gujarat, developed an elaborate system of water reservoirs and channels to manage its scarce rainfall. Lothal, situated closer to the coast, constructed what is interpreted as a dockyard to support maritime trade. These examples reveal a flexible urban model, one capable of adjusting to local needs while maintaining broader cultural patterns. What allowed this expansive civilization to function so effectively was its economic system. Agriculture remained the backbone of the Indus economy, but it was now supported by extensive trade networks, craft specialization, and state-level storage and distribution systems. Farmers cultivated barley, wheat, peas, sesame, and cotton. The introduction and widespread cultivation of cotton was particularly notable, as the Indus Valley people are among the earliest known producers of cotton textiles in the world. Irrigation systems, though not as grand as those in Mesopotamia, were sufficient for local needs and included canal diversions, bunds, and reservoirs. These techniques enabled productivity even in regions with seasonal rainfall or unpredictable rivers. Surplus production allowed for the feeding of large urban populations and supported the rise of a class of full-time artisans, traders, and administrators. Craft production flourished during this time. Skilled workers produced beads from semi-precious stones such as carnelian, agate, and lapis lazuli. The beads were shaped, drilled, and polished using advanced techniques, some of which required controlled heating. Faience, a glazed, non-clay ceramic, was also produced and used for ornaments, tiles, and amulets. The widespread distribution of such artifacts across the region reflects the presence of organized workshops and distribution networks. Metallurgy advanced as well. Copper was used for tools, weapons, and household items. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, was known, though tin sources were scarce in the region. This suggests that tin may have been imported, possibly from Central Asia or present-day Afghanistan. Tools such as saws, chisels, razors, and fishhooks were commonly made, and there is evidence of copper smelting workshops in several cities. Trade extended far beyond the Indus region. Archaeological finds show that the mature Harappans traded with Mesopotamia, the Persian Gulf, and possibly even the Oxus civilization in Central Asia. Mesopotamian records from cities like mention a place called Meluha, believed to be the Indus region, and describe goods such as carnelian, ivory, cotton textiles, and wood being imported from there. Seals of Indus origin have been found in Mesopotamian sites, and conversely, Mesopotamian items appear in Harappan contexts. To manage such widespread trade, the Harappans relied on an advanced system of weights and measures. Cubical weights made from chert, marked in binary and decimal multiples, allowed for precise calculation of goods. These weights have been found in both urban marketplaces and rural outposts, showing their role in both local and long-distance commerce. One of the most enigmatic and defining features of the mature Harappan period is the Indus script. This script, found on thousands of seals, pottery fragments, and tablets, consists of short sequences of symbols, usually 4 to 5 characters long, but sometimes extending to a dozen. The script has not yet been deciphered, and its exact nature remains debated. It may have represented a logosyllabic system, a proto-writing system, or something entirely different. Regardless of its meaning, the widespread and consistent use of these symbols points to a literate, or at least symbolically sophisticated society. The presence of the script on seals, weights, and trade goods implies administrative control, record-keeping, and possibly the naming of individuals, products, or places. Governance during the mature Harappan period remains a topic of scholarly debate. Unlike Mesopotamia or Egypt, there is no evidence of monumental royal architecture, written laws, or depictions of rulers. Instead, the uniformity of material culture and infrastructure suggests a highly organized society that operated through civic institutions, merchant councils, or religious collectives rather than autocratic kings. This absence of ostentatious displays of power has led some scholars to propose that the Indus system was decentralized, with authority shared among local elites or communities rather than concentrated in a central capital. Religious or ritual life also leaves few grand monuments but offers intriguing clues. Seals often feature animals such as bulls, elephants, rhinoceroses, and tigers, sometimes in mythological or composite forms. One recurring figure, seated in a yogic posture and surrounded by animals, has been interpreted by some as a proto-Shiva or Pashupati figure, though this remains speculative. Small terracotta figurines, particularly female forms with elaborate headdresses, may represent goddesses or fertility icons. Fire altars and water tanks like the Great Bath suggest ritual activity focused on purification or community ceremonies. Social organization appears to have been relatively balanced. Residential architecture shows a range of home sizes, but there is little evidence of extreme wealth or poverty. Access to public infrastructure, such as wells, drains, and streets, was broadly shared. This suggests a civic ethos that prioritized community planning and equitable access over hierarchical display. While the architectural and administrative sophistication of the Indus Valley civilization often draws much attention, it is the lives of the people, families, artisans, laborers, and traders that truly bring these ancient cities to life. In the mature Harappan phase, everyday activity was not confined to elite structures or monumental spaces, but occurred in homes, courtyards, workshops, and public streets. Understanding this daily experience gives us a more complete picture of the civilization's inner workings, how people lived, what they valued, and how their communities functioned on the ground. Residential structures across the major Indus cities followed remarkably consistent patterns. Houses were generally made from baked or sun-dried bricks and were often organized around a central courtyard. This courtyard acted as the heart of the home, used for cooking, socializing, and small-scale crafts. Rooms were arranged around this open space and varied in size depending on the household's needs. Some homes had multiple stories, staircases, and even private wells or latrines, indicating varying degrees of wealth or status among city dwellers. Despite differences in size, many homes had access to public infrastructure, such as paved streets and covered drainage systems. This reflects a civic structure that prioritized shared services and hygiene across social classes. Public wells were common and evenly distributed throughout urban areas, allowing all residents easy access to clean water. This communal approach to basic services suggests a strong emphasis on urban planning that served the wider population, not just elites. Daily work was often tied to the location of the household. In many neighborhoods, residential and craft activities occurred side by side. Evidence of bead-making, pottery firing, shell cutting, and textile production has been found within or adjacent to homes. This integration of living and working spaces indicates that most craft production was domestic or workshop-based, rather than confined to large industrial centers. One of the most vibrant areas of urban life was the marketplace. Though formal market buildings have not been identified, certain open areas near city centers and along wide streets likely served as hubs for trade and exchange. Standardized weights and measures found in these areas imply that transactions were regulated and that systems of accountability were in place. The presence of seals and counters suggests a degree of record-keeping and perhaps even merchant guilds or trading families who managed the flow of goods. Food preparation and consumption reveal much about daily rhythms. Archaeological finds include grinding stones, ovens, and storage jars used to prepare staples such as wheat, barley, lentils, sesame, and possibly rice in some eastern regions. Animal remains found in urban middens show that cattle, water buffalo, goats, and sheep were part of the diet, along with fish and, in some cases, game animals. Cooking was likely done with firewood or dung cakes, and meals may have been simple but varied depending on season and location. Clothing is known primarily through indirect evidence: terracotta figurines, spindle whorls, and impressions on seals. These sources suggest that people wore wrapped garments, possibly similar to later South Asian styles such as the sari or dhoti. The use of cotton, which the Indus people were among the first to cultivate and weave, set them apart from other Bronze Age civilizations that relied on wool or linen. Ornamentation was common. Beads made from semi-precious stones, bangles from terracotta or shell, and elaborate hairpins or headdresses were found in both urban homes and burial contexts. Gender roles in the Indus Valley remain difficult to define with precision given the lack of written records. However, the presence of female figurines and domestic tools in homes suggests that women played central roles in household management, food production, and perhaps local ritual life. Meanwhile, men may have been more involved in external labor, trade, or specialized crafts, though the archaeological record does not clearly delineate tasks along strict gender lines. The relative lack of elite burials or statuary also makes it hard to identify high-ranking individuals of either gender. Children were also part of urban life, and their presence is visible in the form of toys, miniature carts, whistles, and animal figurines made from terracotta. These objects indicate both leisure and learning, as some toys may have served educational purposes, preparing children for adult roles in trade, farming, or craftwork. The survival of such artifacts suggests a society that allowed for childhood expression and creativity. Health and sanitation were priorities within the cities. The widespread use of covered drains and public baths reflects a strong concern for cleanliness. Latrines have been found connected to drainage channels, and some homes had ceramic vessels or pits used for waste disposal. While these systems may not have eliminated disease entirely, they represent one of the most advanced public health efforts of any ancient civilization. Skeletal remains show a generally healthy population, though there is evidence of arthritis, tooth wear, and occasional trauma, typical for pre-modern urban societies. Education and literacy remain difficult to assess. The existence of the Indus script on seals, tablets, and pottery suggests that certain individuals could read and write, or at least recognize symbols. However, since the script remains undeciphered and is found in relatively short sequences, it is unclear how widespread literacy was or what form it took. Still, the consistent use of symbols across cities implies a shared cultural understanding of these signs, possibly passed down through oral traditions or local instruction. Religious or spiritual life was likely integrated into daily routines. Small household altars, fire pits, and ritual objects indicate that people practiced local forms of worship. The famous Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, while not directly tied to a temple, may have hosted communal rituals related to purification or seasonal festivals. Similarly, the placement of figurines and amulets in homes suggests that protective or fertility-related beliefs played a role in everyday decisions. Art and symbolism also played a role in the cultural life of the cities. Carvings on seals often depicted animals, mythological beings, or composite creatures. These images, repeated across the region, may have served not only administrative but also spiritual or cultural purposes. The bull, for instance, appears frequently, perhaps representing strength, fertility, or a divine symbol. Other motifs include elephants, rhinoceroses, and unicorn-like figures, which may have held symbolic meanings now lost to us. Community gatherings likely occurred in public spaces, although no large theaters or arenas have been found. Instead, broad streets, courtyards, and city platforms may have served as locations for meetings, markets, or festivals. These shared spaces allowed residents to interact, exchange goods, and maintain social cohesion. The general absence of monumental buildings for kings or priests suggests that civic and communal life may have been more horizontally organized than in other ancient cultures. Burial practices further reflect the character of Indus society. Most burials were simple, with the body laid on its side in a pit, accompanied by a few personal items such as pottery, beads, or tools. The relative uniformity of graves, regardless of apparent wealth, supports the idea of a socially balanced community with limited extremes of wealth or power. Some regional variation exists, particularly in the use of brick-lined graves or symbolic offerings, but no signs of royal tombs or elaborate funerary cults have been found. What stands out across the evidence is the consistency and orderliness of daily life. From the architecture of homes to the design of tools, from the layout of streets to the organization of markets, the cities of the Indus Valley reflect a society deeply invested in coordination, functionality, and shared standards. This does not mean life was without tension or hardship, but it does suggest a broad cultural consensus on how to live together in complex urban environments. Among the many features that define the Indus Valley civilization, none remains as mysterious and as compelling as its script. Inscribed on seals, pottery, tools, and small tablets, the Indus script stands as one of the few major writing systems of the ancient world that has yet to be deciphered. Despite its undeciphered status, the script played an important role in the economic, administrative, and perhaps religious life of the civilization. Understanding what is known and what is still unknown about this script and the objects that carried it offers deep insight into how the Indus people communicated, organized, and represented their world. The majority of inscriptions come from small, square, or rectangular objects known as seals. These seals, typically carved from steatite and fired to harden, are among the most iconic artifacts of the Indus Valley. Most feature a central animal motif, a short sequence of symbols, usually no more than 5 to 7, and, in some cases, decorative elements such as borders or geometric frames. These inscriptions are almost always linear, written from right to left, and follow a consistent visual style across the entire geographic span of the civilization. Seals were likely used to stamp impressions into soft clay or similar materials. Archaeologists have discovered many such impressions on ceilings used to mark packages, containers, and bundles of goods. This suggests that seals functioned as tools of identification and verification, much like modern-day trademarks or official stamps. Their wide distribution in both urban and rural sites speaks to their role in trade, inventory control, and possibly taxation or ownership records. One of the most common animals depicted on the seals is the humped bull, known as the zebu. Other frequent motifs include elephants, rhinoceroses, water buffaloes, and mythical or composite creatures, including the so-called unicorn, a one-horned figure that does not match any known animal species. The exact meaning of these images remains uncertain. Some scholars believe they could represent clan symbols, deities, or totemic animals. Others suggest they may be markers of profession or region. What is clear is that these animals held symbolic significance and were consistently chosen for these important objects. The script itself is composed of several hundred distinct signs. Estimates vary slightly, but most scholars agree that the number of unique characters falls between 400 and 600. This suggests a script more complex than a simple alphabet, but less extensive than a fully developed logographic system like Chinese. Many signs appear to be compound forms, made by combining simpler elements. This layering implies a sophisticated structure with internal logic, though its rules remain elusive. Despite extensive study, no definitive breakthrough in deciphering the script has been achieved. Part of the challenge lies in the brevity of the inscriptions. Most examples are extremely short, just a few symbols in length, which offers limited context for interpretation. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs, which were decoded with the help of the Rosetta Stone, the Indus script lacks any bilingual or multilingual inscription to act as a guide. Furthermore, there is no agreed-upon language family to which the Indus script can be linked. Proposals have included Dravidian, Indo-Aryan, and even Munda roots, but none has been universally accepted. Several approaches have been taken in the effort to decipher the script. Some researchers have tried statistical analysis to identify recurring patterns or grammatical structures. Others have compared signs to symbols found in Mesopotamia or Elam, hoping to identify shared conventions. Still others have looked at continuity in South Asian religious symbols or attempted to match signs with early Tamil or Sanskrit words. However, without longer texts or bilingual comparisons, these efforts remain inconclusive. The seals also raise important questions about literacy and access to written knowledge in the Indus world. Given the standardized nature of the symbols and their presence across a wide region, it is likely that some segments of society, perhaps merchants, administrators, or priests, were trained in reading and writing. However, the absence of long texts, public inscriptions, or literary works suggests that the use of writing may have been restricted to specific functions, particularly economic and administrative ones. Writing may not have been a widespread tool of communication, but rather a specialized method used for tracking goods, identities, or ritual items. Some artifacts hint at a broader application of the script beyond seals. For example, small copper tablets found at Mohenjo-Daro bear inscriptions that may relate to weights or trade values. Pottery shards with brief markings could indicate ownership or contents. A few inscribed stone tablets feature multiple rows of symbols, suggesting that the script may have been used in longer-form contexts that have not survived in greater number. It is also possible that writing was done on perishable materials such as cloth, wood, or palm leaves, materials that would not survive the passage of millennia. Despite the lack of deciphered texts, the uniform appearance and distribution of the script reinforce the idea of a shared cultural identity. Whether one lived in Harappa, Lothal, or Dholavira, the visual language of seals and symbols was familiar. This cohesion speaks to a level of integration that is rare among early civilizations, especially one that operated without the visible presence of a centralized state or empire. It is also worth noting that the use of writing declined sharply during the late Harappan period. As urban centers began to fragment and long-distance trade diminished, the seals and inscriptions gradually disappeared from the archaeological record. This suggests that the script was closely tied to the urban and commercial framework of the mature civilization. When that framework collapsed, the need or capacity for writing may have faded along with it. The Indus script remains one of the last great undeciphered writing systems of the ancient world. It continues to challenge scholars, offering tantalizing glimpses into a lost language and worldview. In its careful arrangement of signs, in the elegance of its carved lines, in the animals chosen to represent power or identity, there is a depth of meaning we have yet to unlock. Still, even in silence, the script speaks of order, continuity, and the importance of symbols in one of humanity's earliest urban societies. At the height of its maturity, the Indus Valley civilization was not an isolated society. Far from being inward-looking, the people of the Indus developed extensive trade connections that reached well beyond the boundaries of the subcontinent. These networks extended westward to Mesopotamia, northward into Central Asia, and southward along the Arabian coast. Through these routes, the Indus people exchanged goods, raw materials, and perhaps even ideas. In doing so, they became a vital part of the broader Bronze Age world. Between 2400 and 2200 years before the Common Era, trade from the Indus Valley reached its peak in both complexity and reach. Evidence of this activity comes from archaeological finds in both Indus sites and foreign settlements, as well as from Mesopotamian cuneiform texts that reference a distant land known as Meluha, widely believed by scholars to refer to the Indus region. One of the most telling pieces of evidence for this connection comes from the city of in southern Mesopotamia, where seal impressions and carved objects of unmistakably Indus origin have been found. These include carnelian beads etched with white patterns using a technique known from Harappan workshops. Similarly, in the city of Susa, located in ancient Elam, modern-day southwestern Iran, archaeologists have uncovered Indus-style weights and pottery fragments, indicating that goods and perhaps merchants traveled across the Iranian plateau. The Mesopotamians themselves recorded these relationships. Cuneiform texts describe Meluhan ships arriving at ports in Sumer, bringing with them valuable items such as ivory, carnelian, shell, and blackwood. These records suggest that the Indus merchants were not only exporting luxury items, but also operating their own vessels, capable of making long sea journeys across the Arabian Sea and into the Persian Gulf. In one such text, a Meluhan interpreter is mentioned, indicating that a language barrier existed and that intermediaries were required, further proof of direct contact. To support maritime trade, the Indus Valley developed coastal settlements that served as ports and trading hubs. Among the most significant of these was Lothal, located in present-day Gujarat. This city, which will be explored in greater detail in a later section, featured a large trapezoidal basin connected to what was once a navigable river. This structure has been interpreted as a dockyard, the earliest known of its kind in South Asia. Even if the exact function of the dock remains debated, it is clear that Lothal played a key role in maritime trade. From Lothal and other coastal settlements, Indus merchants likely traveled by sea to ports in Oman and Bahrain. In these regions, Indus pottery, seals, and weights have been discovered in archaeological contexts, suggesting permanent or semi-permanent trade outposts. The presence of Harappan artifacts in coastal Arabian sites such as Ras al-Jins and Hili shows that these trade relationships were not merely sporadic but sustained over generations. One of the key goods that flowed through these networks was copper. The Indus Valley had some access to local copper sources, particularly in Baluchistan and Rajasthan. but much of its metal likely came from the rich deposits of Oman and possibly even further west. Copper was essential for the production of tools, ornaments, and trade goods. In exchange, the Indus merchants likely offered carnelian beads, finely crafted pottery, textiles, and perhaps agricultural products such as sesame oil or dried fish. Carnelian, a reddish-orange semi-precious stone, was particularly prized. The Indus craftsmen mastered the art of shaping, drilling, and polishing carnelian beads with a level of precision that was unmatched in the ancient world. Many of these beads have been found not only in Indus sites, but also in royal tombs in Mesopotamia, indicating that they were considered luxury items suitable for elite consumption. The movement of materials was not limited to finished goods. Raw materials were also traded. For instance, lapis lazuli from Badakhshan in northeastern Afghanistan traveled south through the mountain passes and entered the Indus Valley before continuing westward to Mesopotamia. This trade route likely passed through sites such as Shortugai, a northern trading outpost linked to the Indus network, which provided a strategic point for controlling the movement of high-value goods. Overland trade complemented maritime routes. Caravans of donkeys and possibly bullock carts transported goods across rugged terrains and desert tracts. These overland routes connected the cities of the Indus to Central Asia, the Iranian plateau, and eventually to the trading centers of the Fertile Crescent. The repeated appearance of Indus artifacts in distant inland sites suggests that there was a steady flow of exchange rather than isolated contact. The trade networks were not only channels for material goods, they also facilitated cultural exchange. While direct evidence of foreign ideas influencing the Indus Valley remains limited, some shared motifs, such as certain seal designs or iconographic elements, hint at cross-cultural interaction. The consistent use of standardized weights and measures across such vast distances suggests an agreed-upon system that eased transactions between different regions. Trade also had an internal dimension. Within the Indus Valley itself, goods moved between the hinterlands and urban centers. Agricultural products from rural areas were transported to cities for storage, processing, or redistribution. Raw materials, such as timber, stone, and metal ores, made their way to specialized workshops in cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. Finished goods then returned to the countryside or were exported to foreign markets. This internal circulation was likely managed through a system of administration, though the exact mechanisms remain unknown. The seals and ceilings, often found in warehouses and storage rooms, indicate that goods were catalogued and controlled. The uniformity of weights and the placement of seals suggest that officials or merchants followed regulated procedures to ensure fairness and accountability. The scale and coordination of trade imply a society that valued efficiency, organization, and mutual trust. While no temples or palaces have been uncovered to suggest theocratic or royal control, the complexity of the trade system points to an institutional framework, perhaps managed by merchant guilds, civic councils, or local administrators. These institutions would have been responsible for maintaining infrastructure, enforcing standards, and resolving disputes. Crucially, the wealth generated by trade supported the broader urban structure of the civilization. Prosperous merchants and craftsmen helped sustain markets, fund construction projects, and create a surplus that could be invested in public infrastructure. The flow of goods across land and sea bound the cities of the Indus together and linked them to distant cultures. As the Indus Valley civilization reached its zenith during the mature Harappan period, the scale and complexity of urban life demanded coordination, resource management, and decision-making structures. Vast cities with meticulously planned layouts, advanced sanitation systems, standardized weights and measures, and expansive trade networks could not have functioned without some form of social and political organization. And yet, what is perhaps most striking about the Indus Valley civilization is what it leaves absent from the archaeological record. No palaces, no monumental statues of rulers, no inscriptions boasting of kings or conquests, and no grand temples asserting the power of a priestly elite. In contrast to the hierarchical states of Mesopotamia and Egypt, where royal tombs, ziggurats, and statues inscribed with the deeds of rulers dominate the material culture, the cities of the Indus Valley offer a subtler, more enigmatic picture. This has led historians and archaeologists to ask a fundamental question: how was such a complex civilization governed? To begin answering this question, we must examine the evidence that does exist. The cities themselves offer the clearest clues. The consistent use of standardized brick dimensions across a vast geographic area suggests an agreed-upon set of construction guidelines. This level of uniformity in materials, urban planning, and civic infrastructure points to a shared cultural framework, possibly enforced or coordinated through administrative oversight. For example, cities like Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, and Dholavira were all laid out with a clear sense of civic planning. Main streets were aligned with the cardinal directions and intersected at right angles. Public wells, drainage systems, and granaries were placed at strategic points across urban spaces. This kind of urban coherence does not emerge spontaneously. It suggests the presence of governing bodies or councils that oversaw city planning and regulated construction. The granaries and storage facilities discovered at several sites add weight to this argument. These large structures, often built on raised platforms with air ducts and access ramps, were clearly meant for storing bulk grain, likely a communal surplus. Their construction would have required collective labor, coordination, and supervision. Furthermore, the storage of grain implies systems of taxation or tribute, where agricultural produce from the countryside was gathered, stored, and redistributed. This reflects a form of economic governance, even if we do not know precisely who was in charge. Administrative tools also appear in the form of seals, ceilings, and weights. The uniformity of these items indicates a regulated system of commerce and accountability. Seals may have been used by officials to mark ownership or authorize transactions, while weights ensured fair trade. Their presence across urban and rural sites suggests that standards were enforced broadly and perhaps overseen by a merchant class or civic authority. Some scholars have proposed that the Indus Valley civilization may have functioned as a collection of city-states, each governed by its own local elite. These elites could have been merchant guilds, landholding families, or religious leaders, groups with the economic means and social influence to coordinate urban life. The lack of centralizing symbols, such as royal iconography, supports this view. In this model, power would have been distributed rather than concentrated, and cooperation between cities might have been maintained through trade alliances or shared cultural norms. Another possibility is that the civilization was governed through a collective or bureaucratic system. In this model, decisions were made not by charismatic individuals, but by committees or councils. These bodies may have operated from central administrative buildings, some of which may be the large pillared halls found in sites like Mohenjo-Daro and Dholavira. These structures could have served as gathering spaces for decision-makers, records offices, or civic forums. Religion may have also played a role in governance, although the absence of large temples or formal religious complexes complicates this theory. Small altars, fire pits, and terracotta figurines point to domestic or localized rituals rather than centralized cults. However, the repeated imagery on seals and the careful placement of water-related structures, such as the Great Bath, suggest that ritual practices had social importance. It is possible that religious specialists held civic authority, overseeing both spiritual and administrative duties in their communities. The lack of identifiable royal burials is another key piece of evidence. In many ancient societies, rulers were buried with lavish grave goods, monumental tombs, and inscriptions detailing their achievements. In the Indus Valley, burials are generally modest and relatively uniform. This suggests either a highly egalitarian society or one in which displays of personal power were deliberately minimized. If elites did exist, and the material record implies that some individuals did enjoy higher status, they may have chosen to emphasize collective identity and civic responsibility over personal glorification. Dholavira offers a particularly intriguing case study. This city, located in the Rann of Kutch, features a tripartite layout with a citadel, a middle town, and a lower town, each surrounded by fortification walls. The city includes large reservoirs, a sophisticated water management system, and a central gateway that may have been used for ceremonial or administrative purposes. While there are no inscriptions or statues declaring the identity of a ruler, the design suggests a high degree of organizational control. The integration of civic infrastructure and symbolic spaces points to a form of rule based on collective engineering, ritual coordination, and perhaps seasonal festivals. It is also possible that the ideology of power in the Indus Valley was fundamentally different from that of other ancient civilizations. Rather than being focused on domination and hierarchy, governance may have emphasized order, community, and sustainability. The emphasis on cleanliness, uniformity, and standardization across the civilization supports this interpretation. Authority may have been expressed through control of knowledge, ritual, or trade, rather than military power or personal grandeur. However, we must also acknowledge the limits of interpretation. The absence of certain types of evidence does not necessarily mean those institutions never existed. Wooden structures, textile hangings, and other perishable symbols of power may have vanished over time. Furthermore, the undeciphered script may one day reveal information about titles, offices, or systems of rule that are currently beyond our reach. Even with these gaps, the governance of the Indus Valley civilization offers a powerful reminder that complexity does not always require centralization. A civilization can thrive without kings, armies, or temples dominating its skyline. The Indus model presents an alternative vision of urban life, one built on consensus, shared standards, and subtle coordination rather than overt displays of power. While the great cities of the Indus Valley have drawn most of the scholarly and popular attention, the real backbone of the civilization lay beyond the city walls, in the vast and complex network of rural settlements that stretched across river valleys, plains, and foothills. These villages and smaller towns were far more than satellite communities. They were the economic lifeline of the civilization, supplying food, raw materials, labor, and regional connectivity that sustained urban growth. Without understanding the countryside, one cannot fully understand the structure and success of the Indus Valley civilization. The rural landscape of the Indus world was densely populated with settlements ranging in size and function. Some were small farming hamlets housing only a few families, while others were large agricultural villages with organized layouts, craft production, and links to nearby urban centers. Archaeological surveys have revealed that for every major city, there were dozens, sometimes hundreds, of rural settlements distributed across the surrounding region. This tiered settlement hierarchy ensured the movement of goods, people, and resources across different scales of society. At the heart of rural life was agriculture. The Indus Valley's agrarian base was diverse, adapting to the varied ecological zones of the region. In the fertile floodplains of Punjab and Sindh, farmers made use of alluvial soils enriched by seasonal flooding. These natural deposits brought nutrient-rich silt, reducing the need for artificial fertilizers. In more arid regions such as Gujarat and parts of Rajasthan, communities employed irrigation and water conservation strategies, including bunds, canals, and reservoirs, to support cultivation during dry seasons. The range of crops grown by Indus farmers was both broad and innovative. Principal staples included wheat and barley, which had been cultivated since the Neolithic period. These grains remained vital throughout the mature Harappan phase. In addition, pulses such as lentils and chickpeas were common, contributing to a protein-rich diet. The Indus people were among the earliest known cultivators of cotton, a crop well suited to the semi-arid climate of northwestern South Asia. Evidence from sites such as Mehrgarh and Mohenjo-Daro confirms the spinning and weaving of cotton into textiles. Another notable crop was sesame, which may have been used both for its seeds and its oil. Rice appears in some eastern sites, particularly in the Ganges-Yamuna Doab, suggesting either local domestication or trade-driven adoption. The presence of multiple crop types indicates a well-developed system of crop rotation and risk diversification. a necessary strategy in a region characterized by monsoon variability and fluctuating river patterns. Domesticated animals played a central role in the rural economy. Zebu cattle were the most important, used not only for meat and milk, but also as draft animals for plowing and transport. Goats and sheep were raised for their wool, meat, and hides, while buffalo were kept in wetter regions for their strength and milk production. There is also evidence for the domestication of pigs and the use of camels and donkeys as pack animals, particularly in trade and long-distance transport. Farming techniques employed by rural communities included the use of wooden plows, often drawn by oxen. In some areas, particularly at Kalibangan, archaeological traces of furrowed fields suggest that farmers practiced systematic planting in straight rows. Fields were likely organized around seasonal cycles, dictated by the timing of the monsoon rains. In regions where rainfall was unpredictable, storage of surplus grains and local irrigation helped buffer against food shortages. Storage was a key aspect of rural agricultural life. Many villages featured granaries, storage pits, and large jars or bins used to hold surplus crops. These storage facilities may have served both household and communal purposes. In some cases, surplus grain was transported to nearby cities, where it was processed, redistributed, or traded. The movement of agricultural goods between rural and urban centers implies the existence of organized collection systems, whether overseen by local councils, merchant guilds, or civic authorities. Craft production was not limited to urban centers. Rural communities engaged in pottery making, weaving, bead production, and metalworking. Many of these crafts were likely conducted at the household level or in small communal workshops. Rural artisans often used locally available materials, but they were also connected to wider networks through the exchange of raw materials and finished goods. For example, shell bangles found in inland villages likely originated from coastal areas, indicating long-distance trade even at the village level. Markets or periodic exchange fairs may have taken place in larger rural settlements, allowing villagers to trade surplus crops, livestock, tools, and crafted items. Such gatherings would also have served social and cultural functions, reinforcing community ties and facilitating information exchange. Though no formal market structures have been found, open courtyards and communal spaces may have served as informal venues for economic interaction. Religious and ritual life in rural areas remains difficult to reconstruct, but some clues exist. Small figurines, altars, and fire pits have been found in many villages, suggesting that spiritual practices were woven into everyday domestic life. These practices may have centered on fertility, agricultural cycles, and ancestral worship. Ritual offerings and household shrines indicate a continuity of belief between urban and rural populations, even if the scale and style of expression varied. Burial practices in rural areas mirror those in the cities, modest, pit graves with limited offerings. This suggests a shared cultural value placed on humility and uniformity in death, further supporting the theory that Indus society, while stratified to some degree, maintained a relatively balanced social structure. The lack of monumental tombs or elite cemeteries, even in large rural centers, underscores the egalitarian tendencies of the broader culture. The strategic location of many rural settlements points to thoughtful planning. Villages were often situated near rivers, seasonal streams, or groundwater sources. Proximity to transportation routes, whether riverine or overland, ensured that rural areas were not isolated but actively integrated into the economic and social web of the civilization. Some larger rural centers may have acted as regional nodes, coordinating the flow of goods and labor between hinterlands and cities. Perhaps one of the most remarkable aspects of the rural Indus world is its stability. Many village sites show continuous occupation over several centuries, with only gradual changes in architecture, material culture, and layout. This long-term continuity indicates a high degree of environmental adaptation and social resilience. Even when cities began to show signs of stress or decline, many rural communities persisted, evolving into new cultural forms that would carry forward aspects of the Indus legacy. It is important to recognize that the success of the Indus Valley civilization rested not just on its cities, trade, or administration, but also on its ability to cultivate and sustain a productive, resilient rural base. The relationship between urban centers and their hinterlands was not one of dominance and dependence, but of mutual exchange. Cities needed food, raw materials, and manpower. Villages relied on urban markets, craft goods, and regional coordination. This interdependence helped maintain the coherence and functionality of the civilization over centuries. Beyond the bricks, drains, and seals that form the material backbone of the Indus Valley, civilization lies a subtler layer of meaning: its art, its religious life, and its symbols. Though the civilization has left behind no deciphered texts or grand religious monuments, it communicated its beliefs and cultural values in other ways. Through figurines, motifs, ritual structures, and carefully chosen artistic forms, the people of the Indus Valley expressed how they saw their world and their place within it. Unlike their contemporaries in Mesopotamia and Egypt, the people of the Indus Valley did not build massive temples or create monumental sculptures to glorify gods or rulers. Yet, the recurring symbols found in their artifacts suggest that religion and spirituality played a central role in daily life. These expressions of belief were likely localized, household-based, and tied closely to nature, fertility, and the cycles of agricultural life. Terracotta figurines are among the most commonly found objects across Indus sites, and they provide important clues to religious thought. Many of these figurines depict female forms, often with exaggerated hips, elaborate jewelry, and headdresses. These are frequently interpreted as representations of a mother goddess or fertility deity. While there is no direct evidence to confirm a formal goddess cult, the wide distribution and stylistic consistency of these figurines point to a shared symbolic language related to reproduction, life, and prosperity. Male figurines are also found, though less frequently. Some show seated or standing figures with horns or animal-like features. A particularly famous seal from Mohenjo-Daro shows a horned figure in a yogic posture, surrounded by animals. This figure has often been linked to later Hindu depictions of Shiva as Pashupati, the lord of animals. While this interpretation remains debated, it illustrates the possibility that certain figures held mythological or divine status and were associated with natural forces or animals. Animal symbolism appears throughout Indus art. Seals regularly feature animals such as bulls, elephants, rhinoceroses, tigers, and water buffaloes. These creatures are not depicted randomly but with careful attention to form and posture, suggesting they carried deeper meanings. The bull, for instance, often appears in a powerful stance, perhaps symbolizing strength or fertility. The recurring unicorn motif, an animal with a single horn, which does not match any known species, suggests a mythic or symbolic function rather than a literal one. These animals may have served as emblems of clans, professions, or deities. They may have been connected to seasonal cycles or agricultural rituals. Whatever their precise meaning, the consistency of these motifs across thousands of kilometers speaks to a shared visual language, one that likely conveyed layers of social and spiritual significance. Another important aspect of Indus religious life may have involved water. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, though unique in its size and construction, suggests the importance of purification rituals or communal bathing. This massive brick-lined tank was carefully sealed to hold water and featured stairways for entry and exit, as well as a sophisticated drainage system. While it is not associated with any temple or altar, its scale and location within the city's citadel hint at ceremonial or ritual use. Smaller bathing platforms and water tanks have also been found at other sites, indicating that water played a symbolic role in both public and private life. The association of water with purity, life, and regeneration is a common thread across many ancient cultures, and the Indus people may have held similar beliefs. Fire may have held ritual importance as well. In the city of Kalibangan, archaeologists have identified a series of fire altars, small brick platforms with circular or oval pits, often found in rows. These structures were likely used for controlled burning, possibly as part of domestic or communal ceremonies. The association of fire with transformation, offering, and purification fits within broader patterns of ancient ritual behavior. The arrangement of space also provides insight into religious and symbolic thinking. Many homes included small niches, platforms, or hearths that may have served ritual purposes. Objects such as incense burners, offering trays, and miniature altars suggest that worship and spiritual observance were integrated into daily domestic life. Rather than being centralized in massive temples, Indus religion may have flourished in homes and neighborhoods, woven into the rhythm of work, family, and community. Artistic expression in the Indus Valley was not limited to religious or symbolic objects. It also included decorative pottery, jewelry, and personal adornment. Painted pottery from the mature Harappan phase often features geometric designs, floral motifs, and occasionally animal figures. The precision of these patterns indicates a well-developed aesthetic sense and a high level of craftsmanship. Beads made from carnelian, faience, agate, and shell were carefully shaped and polished, sometimes using advanced techniques like heating and etching. The effort invested in these objects suggests that ornamentation was culturally valued, possibly as a marker of status, identity, or group affiliation. Some beads were crafted into intricate necklaces, others into bangles or headpieces. The distribution of such items in both urban and rural graves reflects their importance across social levels. Stamp seals also blended art, identity, and function. In addition to animal motifs and script, many seals featured complex geometric patterns, mythological figures, or composite creatures. These images may have held spiritual meaning or acted as talismans, linking the bearer to a protective force or ancestral lineage. The seal impressions used in trade and administration were not just functional tools, they were also symbols of legitimacy, authority, and cultural identity. The use of symbolism extended to architecture and city planning. While the Indus people did not build ziggurats or pyramids, their cities were clearly designed with symbolic intent. The division between higher citadel areas and lower towns, the orientation of streets, the placement of wells and platforms, all reflect a sense of order, hierarchy, and perhaps cosmological thinking. The emphasis on cleanliness, symmetry, and modular design may have reflected a worldview that valued harmony, balance, and the regulation of space. Even in death, symbolic elements appear. Though burials were modest, some graves included carefully chosen items, pottery, beads, and personal tools, suggesting beliefs about the afterlife or the soul's journey. The lack of ostentation does not indicate a lack of meaning. Rather, it suggests that spiritual and social values emphasized humility, continuity, and connection over display and hierarchy. What is perhaps most remarkable about Indus religion and symbolism is its quiet consistency. Across centuries and across thousands of kilometers, the same motifs, figures, and structures appear. There is little evidence of dramatic change, conquest, or religious upheaval. This stability suggests a deep cultural consensus, one that was capable of integrating diverse communities under a shared set of values, rituals, and beliefs. While much remains unknown, the material evidence points to a civilization that approached religion not through spectacle, but through integration. Spiritual life was embedded in homes, in craft, in the careful arrangement of city streets and courtyards. The divine may not have been distant or abstract, but present in the cycles of nature, the symbols of animals, and the everyday rituals of the household. Situated on the arid island of Kadir in the Rann of Kutch, Dholavira stands as one of the most extraordinary urban sites of the Indus Valley civilization. Far removed from the core cluster of cities along the Indus and its tributaries, Dholavira offers a unique glimpse into how this civilization adapted its practices to a different ecological and geographic context. What sets Dholavira apart is not only its remote location, but also its distinctive architectural features, engineering innovations, and symbolic structures, elements that demonstrate both the diversity and the coherence of the broader Indus world. Dholavira was first discovered in the second half of the 20th century, and its excavation has since revealed a city unlike any other within the civilization. estimated to have been occupied from the early Harappan through the mature and into the late Harappan phases. Dholavira represents a continuous and evolving urban tradition spanning several centuries. The city's layout is its most remarkable feature. Dholavira was organized into a tripartite structure, divided into a citadel, a middle town, and a lower town, each enclosed by its own fortification wall. This threefold division is unique within the Indus context and suggests a sophisticated understanding of spatial hierarchy, function, and symbolism. The walls themselves were built with carefully dressed stone blocks, unlike the primarily brick constructions seen at Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa. This use of stone was likely a practical response to the scarcity of clay in the region, but it also illustrates a distinctive local adaptation in architectural materials. The central citadel area of Dholavira was raised on a high platform and may have served administrative or ceremonial functions. Within this area stood a large rectangular structure, often interpreted as a meeting hall or assembly space. Massive in scale and supported by stone columns, this structure reflects the capacity for monumental construction even in a relatively marginal environment. Its exact purpose remains uncertain, but it suggests a communal or elite gathering place, possibly for civic deliberation or ritual activity. Another extraordinary feature of Dholavira is its advanced water management system. Located in a semi-arid region with highly seasonal rainfall, the city faced the constant challenge of water scarcity. In response, its inhabitants engineered an elaborate system of reservoirs, channels, and catchment basins to harvest, store, and distribute water. Some of these reservoirs were carved directly into the bedrock, lined with stone, and equipped with sluices and steps for access. The scale and technical sophistication of this system rival anything seen in other Bronze Age cities, and it underscores the ingenuity of the Indus people in responding to environmental constraints. These water structures were not merely utilitarian. Their integration into the city's layout, their symmetry, and their scale suggest symbolic as well as practical significance. Water may have held ritual value, and the act of storing and distributing it could have been imbued with social meaning. The prominence of these reservoirs within the city's design reinforces the central role that water played, not only in sustaining life, but also in shaping civic identity and cultural expression. One of the most debated finds at Dholavira is a large inscription composed of 10 Indus symbols, arranged on a long wooden board once mounted above a city gate. Though the board itself has not survived, the stone packing that held it in place and the associated inscriptions were found intact. This discovery is one of the longest known examples of Indus script and one of the few placed in a public, elevated position. Unlike most seals and tokens which were used in private or administrative contexts, the purpose of this inscription remains unknown. It may have identified the city, the gate, a public proclamation, or a religious message. Whatever its content, its prominent placement suggests that writing in the Indus world was not always limited to small-scale utilitarian applications. At least in some contexts, it could take on a more public and possibly symbolic role, visible to a broader audience. Dholavira also provides important evidence of long-distance trade. Its location, situated between inland Gujarat and the Arabian Sea, would have allowed access to both overland and maritime routes. Artifacts recovered from the site include marine shells, semi-precious stones, and ceramics that likely originated from distant regions. This suggests that Dholavira functioned not only as a regional center, but also as a hub in broader networks of exchange. Its merchants and craftsmen likely participated in the same trading systems that connected the core Indus cities with Central Asia, Mesopotamia, and the Persian Gulf. The site's isolation also allowed it to develop unique forms of artistic and architectural expression. Stone carvings, for example, are more common at Dholavira than at other Indus cities. These include door jambs, column bases, and decorative elements featuring floral and geometric motifs. While the overall aesthetic remains consistent with Harappan norms, favoring order, symmetry, and restraint, there is also a clear regional flavor in the way materials and forms were adapted. Domestic life at Dholavira mirrored that of other Indus cities in many respects. Houses were built with stone foundations, included multiple rooms, and were often oriented along the cardinal directions. Some residences had attached wells, bathing areas, and storage spaces. Pottery and small finds suggest that residents engaged in cooking, weaving, bead-making, and other daily activities much as they did in Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro. Burials at Dholavira also reflect interesting regional practices. The cemetery area includes a range of burial types, including pit burials, cist graves, and symbolic cenotaphs where no human remains were found. This diversity may point to evolving mortuary beliefs or to the presence of multiple cultural groups within the city. Grave goods include pottery, jewelry, and personal ornaments, indicating that status and identity were expressed in death as well as life. What Dholavira ultimately reveals is the remarkable adaptability of the Indus civilization. Far from being a rigid or uniform system, it was capable of responding to different environmental, geographic, and cultural conditions. At the same time, the city's adherence to core elements of Indus planning, its emphasis on order, water management, and symbolic architecture, demonstrates the strength of shared values across the civilization's vast territory. Dholavira pushes the boundaries of our understanding of the Indus world. It shows that even in challenging landscapes, urban life could flourish when guided by innovation, resilience, and a deep commitment to civic organization. It also suggests that the frontier regions were not peripheral but integral to the civilization's identity and evolution. At the southeastern edge of the Indus Valley, civilization's expansive reach lies one of its most strategically located and technologically intriguing urban centers, Lothal. Situated in present-day Gujarat, Lothal was a coastal town that played a vital role in maritime trade. Its importance does not stem solely from its size or urban design, but from its function as a port city, a gateway that connected the Indus civilization to the wider world across the Arabian Sea. Lothal's significance emerges not only from archaeological discoveries, but from its role in extending the civilization's commercial influence far beyond its traditional heartland. Unlike inland cities such as Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro, which were positioned along riverbanks for access to fresh water and transportation, Lothal was built in proximity to tidal rivers that opened into the Gulf of Kambat. This location allowed it to serve as a maritime trading hub, facilitating the movement of goods between inland regions and overseas markets. Perhaps the most distinctive and widely discussed feature of Lothal is its dockyard. Measuring roughly 218 meters long and about 37 meters wide, this trapezoidal basin was constructed with fine brickwork and featured sluice gates to control water flow. It was connected to an ancient course of the river Bogavo, which may have been navigable during the period of Lothal's occupation. The dockyard stands as one of the earliest known examples of such engineering anywhere in the ancient world. This dockyard was not simply a water reservoir or ceremonial structure. Its strategic placement outside the main fortified area of the town, along with features like mooring stones and stepped platforms, strongly suggests that it was used for loading and unloading cargo from boats. The presence of anchoring stones, a wharf, and a spillway further supports this interpretation. Through this facility, goods could be brought in from other coastal settlements, loaded for overseas voyages, or shipped inland along riverine routes. The economic activities at Lothal reflected its position as a commercial node. Excavations have revealed warehouses adjacent to the dockyard, constructed with fire-baked bricks and equipped with ventilation systems to protect stored goods from humidity. These warehouses likely held items intended for trade: carnelian beads, shell ornaments, metal tools, and finished pottery. Some storage rooms contained circular impressions in the floors, where storage jars once rested, indicating an organized system for handling merchandise. Lothal's artisans were particularly skilled in bead making, an industry for which the site became well known. Beads made from semi-precious stones, such as carnelian, agate, and chalcedony, were crafted using techniques that involved heating, drilling, and polishing. These beads were among the most valued export items in the Indus trade network and have been found at sites as far away as Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf. Shell working was another prominent craft. The discovery of large quantities of shell waste, along with finished bangles and ornaments, suggests that Lothal's artisans transformed raw marine shells into desirable personal items. The proximity to the sea provided ready access to these materials, making Lothal an ideal location for this industry. Pottery at Lothal exhibits both local and regional characteristics. While much of it follows the general Harappan style, featuring red ware with black painted designs, some ceramic pieces show unique motifs, including intersecting circles and abstract patterns. These local variations may reflect regional tastes or the influence of contact with foreign traders. In addition to its economic and industrial activities, Lothal was also well planned in terms of its urban layout. The town featured a grid-like pattern with streets aligned at right angles, dividing residential and public areas into rectangular blocks. Homes were built from mud bricks and often included private wells, bathing areas, and drainage systems. Public drainage channels ran along major streets, connected to soak pits that filtered wastewater. This attention to sanitation and order was consistent with the broader standards of the Indus civilization. What is particularly notable about Lothal is how it adapted urban principles to a maritime environment. Whereas cities like Mohenjo-Daro relied on their proximity to rivers for water supply and transport, Lothal was integrated into the rhythms of the tide, the flow of the sea, and the demands of international commerce. Its success demonstrates the flexibility and innovation of Indus urbanism in addressing different ecological and economic challenges. Beyond the material evidence, Lothal also provides insight into the cultural and symbolic aspects of Indus society. A series of terracotta figurines, seals, and miniature altars have been uncovered, reflecting domestic religious practices. One notable seal found at Lothal features a ship with a high prow and multiple oars, offering rare iconographic evidence that supports the site's maritime identity. Though the Indus script on this seal remains undeciphered, its imagery reinforces the idea that sea travel and trade were important themes in the local culture. Lothal's position along the trade routes connecting the Indus Valley to Western Asia brought it into contact with distant cultures. Finds of Mesopotamian-style artifacts, including cylindrical beads and etched carnelian jewelry, suggest mutual influence. Moreover, the presence of standardized weights and measures, identical to those found in cities hundreds of kilometers away, underscores the integration of Lothal into the broader administrative and economic system of the Indus world. The town's strategic location also made it a cultural crossroads. While primarily Harappan in character, Lothal's artifacts show hints of regional influences from the Deccan Plateau and the Arabian coast. These elements suggest that the city may have attracted a diverse population of traders, craftsmen, and sailors from across the western Indian Ocean. This cultural diversity likely enriched its markets and workshops, making it a vibrant and cosmopolitan place in its time. Lothal was not immune to environmental pressures. Geological studies indicate that changing river courses and episodes of flooding may have contributed to the eventual decline of the dockyard's functionality. Siltation and shifts in the coastline likely made navigation difficult, reducing the site's effectiveness as a port. Despite these challenges, the settlement continued to be occupied, though with a gradual decline in scale and complexity. Even in its later phases, Lothal retained many of its core features: carefully laid streets, drainage systems, and standardized construction. This persistence reflects the durability of the cultural template developed during the mature Harappan period, even as specific economic and environmental conditions began to shift. Lothal's legacy lies not only in its dockyard or its craftsmanship, but in what it reveals about the outward-facing dimension of the Indus Valley civilization. While much of the civilization's history focuses on internal coherence, order, and planning, Lothal shows that its people were also seafarers, innovators, and global participants. They engaged with distant regions not just for commerce, but as part of a larger vision of civilization that embraced movement, adaptation, and exchange. Beginning around 2200 years before the Common Era, subtle but mounting signs of stress began to appear. These were not sudden catastrophes, nor were they marked by invasions or internal collapse in the traditional sense. Instead, they emerged gradually, an accumulation of environmental pressures, economic strain, and social adjustments that would, over time, challenge the resilience of this remarkable civilization. One of the most widely studied and debated factors contributing to this period of stress is climate change. Geological and paleo-environmental research has indicated that this era saw significant shifts in regional climate patterns. Evidence drawn from lake sediments, river cores, and pollen analysis points to a weakening of the Indian summer monsoon. The monsoon, which brings vital rainfall to the subcontinent, had been the lifeblood of Indus agriculture. Any reduction in its intensity or predictability would have had profound implications for crop yields, water storage, and settlement sustainability. In particular, the regions that had previously benefited from seasonal flooding, such as the floodplains of the Indus and the Ghaggar-Hakra system, became increasingly vulnerable to droughts and river desiccation. As rains diminished and rivers began to dry or change course, some cities and villages found themselves cut off from essential water sources. This ecological instability likely disrupted agricultural cycles, leading to food shortages, loss of surplus, and a decline in trade goods. The Ghaggar-Hakra river system, once considered a crucial artery of the eastern Harappan settlements, is believed to have either dried up or significantly reduced in volume during this time. Many sites along its banks, such as Kalibangan and Banawali, show signs of decline or abandonment. Without reliable water, irrigation systems failed, crop production fell, and local populations would have been forced to migrate or adapt. The drying of this river system did not just impact agriculture, it may have also undermined trade routes and cultural connectivity across the region. Meanwhile, evidence from coastal sites such as Lothal suggests that shifting river paths and increasing sedimentation may have rendered some harbors and ports less functional. Siltation of the dockyard at Lothal, for example, might have reduced its utility for maritime trade. Similarly, inland riverine routes may have become less navigable, further isolating urban centers that had once thrived on the movement of goods and people. Compounding these environmental challenges was the issue of overexpansion. By the height of the mature Harappan period, the civilization had extended across an enormous geographic area, encompassing diverse ecological zones, from the Himalayas in the north to the Arabian Sea in the south, and from Baluchistan in the west to the upper reaches of the Ganges Basin in the east. While this expansion demonstrated the civilization's adaptability and ambition, it also placed enormous demands on coordination, communication, and resource management. The highly standardized nature of Indus urbanism, which required uniform brick dimensions, weights, scripts, and planning norms, may have become increasingly difficult to maintain across such distances, especially as environmental conditions varied widely between regions. Maintaining such uniformity across changing landscapes and under growing climatic pressure may have strained administrative and logistical systems beyond sustainable limits. Archaeological evidence from this period shows a pattern of gradual urban contraction. Major cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa begin to show signs of declining maintenance. Public buildings are no longer repaired with the same care. The quality of brickwork diminishes. Drainage systems clog and are left unattended. In some layers, streets are narrowed by encroaching construction, and planned layouts give way to more haphazard developments, suggesting a breakdown of centralized planning. At the same time, there is a noticeable shift in settlement patterns. Instead of large urban centers, smaller scattered villages and towns begin to dominate the landscape. These settlements often move closer to reliable water sources or shift to more defensible positions. The population appears to have dispersed, possibly in response to declining food security, rising disease, or environmental degradation. This process of ruralization was not a complete collapse, but a reorganization, a strategic response to the changing conditions. Trade networks also appear to shrink during this time. The number of long-distance imports, such as lapis lazuli, Mesopotamian-style artifacts, and Persian Gulf shells, declines sharply. This could indicate a breakdown in international trade or a redirection of economic activity toward more localized systems. The loss of surplus goods due to agricultural decline may have also reduced the capacity of merchants to engage in overseas commerce. Another potential factor contributing to the decline was soil depletion and salinization. Long-term farming in river valleys, particularly under conditions of irrigation and poor drainage, can lead to the buildup of salts in the soil. In parts of Mesopotamia, this phenomenon contributed to agricultural collapse. It is possible that similar processes occurred in the Indus region, especially in areas with flat terrain and limited drainage. The social impact of these stresses is harder to trace, but likely significant. As cities contracted and trade diminished, the institutions that had coordinated civic life may have lost their authority. The relative social balance that characterized earlier phases of the civilization may have given way to increased inequality or competition for scarce resources. The absence of monumental warfare or mass destruction layers suggests that this was not an era of widespread violence, but rather one of fragmentation and transformation. One of the few notable changes in cultural expression during this period is the decline in the use of the Indus script. In earlier times, the script had been widely used on seals, pottery, and tools, suggesting its integration into trade, identity, and administration. During this later phase, the number and distribution of inscribed objects drops dramatically. This may reflect the breakdown of the centralized administrative systems that had previously maintained record-keeping and standardization. Despite these challenges, the civilization did not vanish overnight. Many communities adapted to new realities by changing their agricultural techniques, relocating their settlements, or adopting different craft traditions. Some regional cultures, particularly in Gujarat and eastern Punjab, continued to thrive well into the post-urban period. Their resilience suggests that while the grand cities may have declined, the knowledge, practices, and cultural continuity of the Indus people lived on. By the beginning of the 19th century, before the Common Era, the Indus Valley civilization was undergoing a profound transformation. The urban order that had once sustained sprawling cities, unified standards, and a vast trade network was now unraveling. This period of fragmentation and decline did not come through dramatic conquest or rapid collapse. Instead, it unfolded slowly, through a series of regional changes that collectively marked the end of the mature Harappan world. Across the civilization's vast territory, archaeological evidence shows a consistent pattern. Large cities like Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, and Kalibangan began to shrink, their infrastructure deteriorating, their once regimented layouts becoming increasingly disordered. Urban neighborhoods became less formally planned. Streets narrowed, houses encroached on public space, and civic facilities fell into disrepair. Drainage systems, once a hallmark of Harappan engineering, were no longer maintained. Wells dried or became clogged, and public sanitation standards visibly declined. The decline was not uniform. Some cities persisted longer than others, but in each case, the evidence points to a breakdown of the centralized planning and civic coordination that had characterized the mature phase of the civilization. Brickmaking standards, which had once been strictly followed across hundreds of kilometers, became inconsistent. The famous ratio of 1 to 2 to 4 used in standardized bricks gave way to irregular dimensions. This suggests that the administrative structures responsible for maintaining building codes, weights, and measures had either disappeared or lost their influence. As urban centers declined, population movement began to shift toward smaller towns and rural settlements. In many regions, people abandoned the large cities and resettled in surrounding countryside or smaller, more manageable communities. These new settlements were often located near reliable water sources or fertile land, indicating a strategic response to the environmental stresses described in the previous section. Rather than total collapse, the Harappan world was transitioning into a more decentralized and agrarian phase. One of the most significant changes during this period was the marked decline in long-distance trade. The flow of exotic goods, such as lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, carnelian from Gujarat, and marine shells from the Arabian Sea slowed dramatically. Artifacts that once connected the Indus Valley to Mesopotamia, Iran, and the Persian Gulf became increasingly rare. The use of standardized weights, seals, and the undeciphered script also diminished or ceased altogether. This decline in commerce indicates not only the loss of overseas connections, but also a weakening of internal distribution systems and economic coordination. The disappearance of the Indus script during this time is particularly noteworthy. For several centuries, the script had been an integral part of trade, administration, and identity across the civilization. Its absence in the archaeological record after the mature phase suggests a major rupture in institutional memory and communication. While oral traditions may have persisted, the written system seems to have fallen into disuse, marking the end of a literate bureaucracy that once linked cities and merchants across the region. Craft production also underwent a shift. While skilled artisans continued to make pottery, beads, and tools, the complexity and refinement of these goods declined. The quality of carnelian beads, for example, diminished, and the intricate techniques used in earlier phases were no longer employed. Instead, simpler methods and locally available materials became the norm. This change reflects both a loss of access to distant resources and a cultural reorientation toward self-sufficiency rather than large-scale exchange. Religious and symbolic life adapted as well. The figurines, seals, and ritual objects that had been common in the mature phase became less frequent, and their styles began to diverge regionally. In some areas, new forms of pottery decoration and burial practices emerged, pointing to evolving belief systems and social identities. The famous mother goddess figurines, once widespread, appeared less often, and in their place, simpler objects with localized characteristics took root. This cultural diversification highlights how communities were reasserting regional identities in the absence of a unifying urban framework. The archaeological site of Cemetery H in Harappa provides insight into some of the cultural transitions of this period. Located adjacent to the mature Harappan settlement, this burial site features distinct pottery, different from that of the earlier phase, with painted motifs and new shapes. The graves are more individualistic, and some include elaborate offerings. These changes suggest a shift in social structure and belief systems, possibly influenced by new populations or internal cultural evolution. Another notable feature of this late phase is the construction of large numbers of defensive walls and fortifications at smaller sites. Whereas the mature Indus cities rarely emphasized militarization, some of the later settlements show signs of increasing concern with security. This might reflect greater inter-community competition, raids, or social instability in the absence of strong central authority. However, the evidence of warfare or organized violence remains limited, suggesting that these were primarily protective responses rather than signs of widespread conflict. The geographical center of settlement activity also began to shift. While the core cities in present-day Pakistan declined, new regions, particularly in Gujarat, Haryana, and western Uttar Pradesh, began to see more sustained occupation. These areas, though part of the broader Harappan cultural sphere, had previously played a more peripheral role. Their rise during the post-urban period suggests a demographic and cultural realignment, likely driven by environmental and economic necessity. Climate data from this period continues to support the idea of ecological stress. The weakening of the monsoon, combined with shifting river courses and periods of drought, made agriculture less predictable. In some cases, communities may have been forced to change crops, adopt new farming techniques, or rely more heavily on pastoralism. These adaptations required flexible social systems and may have led to a breakdown in older institutions that were less responsive to change. Importantly, the decline of the Indus Valley civilization was not a civilizational disappearance in the strictest sense. The people, technologies, and many aspects of the Harappan way of life did not vanish. They transformed. Pottery styles, agricultural practices, and architectural traditions continued in new forms. The legacy of the Indus lived on in the cultural foundations of the regions it once spanned. This era of fragmentation should not be viewed solely through the lens of loss. It also marked the beginning of new regional identities, new cultural experiments, and new forms of political and social organization. In the centuries to come, these post-Harappan communities would evolve, blend with incoming populations, and lay the groundwork for the next phase of South Asian history. In the centuries following the decline of the great urban centers of the Indus Valley civilization, a new phase of cultural development emerged. Commonly referred to as the late Harappan period, Spanning roughly from the 17th to the 13th century before the Common Era, this period did not represent a return to primitive life or complete societal collapse. Rather, it was a time of regional adaptation, cultural continuity, and gradual transformation. Across what had once been a unified civilization, new and diverse communities evolved, maintaining certain traditions while developing distinct local identities. As cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro faded into history, their surrounding regions remained inhabited. In many cases, people resettled in smaller villages nearby or reused parts of the old urban structures for new purposes. These settlements were typically less formally planned than their predecessors, but they continued to display elements of the Harappan material culture. Pottery styles, weights, tools, and domestic architecture retained recognizably Indus characteristics, though they gradually shifted in form, technique, and symbolism. The most prominent archaeological evidence of this period comes from sites in Punjab, Haryana, Gujarat, and western Uttar Pradesh. At Harappa itself, the cemetery H culture became a defining feature of the post-urban phase. The pottery associated with this culture includes distinctive painted designs, wavy lines, geometric patterns, and stylized motifs that differ from the earlier Harappan ware. The burials from Cemetery H also suggest a change in ritual practices. Cremation becomes more common, and graves are often accompanied by painted urns and offerings, indicating evolving beliefs about death and the afterlife. In Gujarat, the post-urban settlements show a degree of resilience and even innovation. Sites like Rangpur, Rajdi, and Prabhas Patan remained active and show continuity in craft production, especially pottery and metallurgy. People in this region adapted to their semi-arid environment through well-established water management techniques. The presence of reservoirs, wells, and canals reveals that the knowledge of hydraulic engineering was preserved and put to use in smaller community contexts. One of the defining features of the late Harappan period is the regionalization of culture. While earlier Harappan society had been marked by remarkable uniformity across a vast area, the post-urban landscape became increasingly fragmented. Local communities began to develop distinct ceramic styles, settlement patterns, and subsistence strategies. These variations reflect both environmental adaptation and the breakdown of the centralized systems that had once enforced cultural consistency. In the eastern regions, particularly in the upper Ganges-Yamuna Doab, Lata Harappan sites like Alamgirpur and Hulas represent the easternmost extent of Indus influence. These sites are small and rural in nature, but they contain artifacts that clearly link them to the Harappan tradition, including painted pottery, stone tools, and house layouts. Over time, these communities would interact with new cultural groups migrating into the region, contributing to the formation of early Vedic society. The technological landscape of the late Harappan phase also evolved. While bronze continued to be used for tools and ornaments, there is increasing evidence of experimentation with iron in the later stages of this period, particularly in eastern and central India. This development marks an important transition toward the early Iron Age and suggests that Harappan metallurgical knowledge played a role in subsequent technological advances. Trade during the late Harappan period became more localized. The long-distance networks that once linked the Indus Valley to Mesopotamia, Central Asia, and the Persian Gulf had largely faded. In their place, more regionally focused systems of exchange emerged. Communities traded within their immediate zones for pottery, foodstuffs, animal products, and raw materials. Shell working, bead making, and ceramic production continued, though at a reduced scale. The shift from international commerce to local subsistence reflects both the new social realities and the diminished surplus economy of the post-urban world. Agriculture remained the primary occupation, with some modifications. In many areas, there was an increased emphasis on drought-resistant crops and mixed farming practices, reflecting changing climate conditions. Barley, wheat, lentils, and millet were grown, often supplemented by animal husbandry. The domestication of zebu cattle continued, and evidence from faunal remains suggests that herding played a larger role in subsistence than before. These adaptive strategies allowed late Harappan communities to maintain food security, despite environmental unpredictability. Religious and symbolic life also underwent transformation, while the elaborate urban symbols of the mature Harappan period, such as seals bearing the Indus script and complex animal motifs, largely disappeared. Simpler forms of ritual and belief persisted. Terracotta figurines continued to be made, often depicting animals, female forms, or abstract symbols. Fire altars and hearths suggest that domestic ritual practices remained integral to daily life. In the spiritual sphere, one of the most intriguing questions is whether elements of Harappan belief systems influenced later South Asian religions. While direct evidence is limited, some scholars have pointed to continuities in iconography, such as the seated yogic figure on Indus seals, which may parallel later depictions of meditation or asceticism in Hindu and Jain traditions. Similarly, the emphasis on purity, water rituals, and fertility found in Harappan sites echoes themes in later religious texts and practices. While these connections remain speculative, they open the door to understanding the Indus legacy as more than material. It may also be philosophical and symbolic. The late Harappan period also coincides with the early stages of Indo-Aryan migration into the Indian subcontinent. While the timeline and impact of these movements remain subjects of scholarly debate, there is increasing consensus that groups speaking Indo-Aryan languages entered northwestern South Asia during this time, likely from Central Asia. These migrants would eventually contribute to the formation of Vedic culture, but rather than completely displacing the Harappan descendants, they likely interacted with them, absorbing, adapting, and reshaping cultural elements in the process. This interaction may have been gradual and complex, involving both conflict and cooperation. Archaeological evidence does not show widespread destruction or abrupt replacement. Instead, there appears to be a process of assimilation and cultural blending, where the agricultural and craft traditions of the Harappan people merged with new linguistic and ritual practices. The eventual emergence of the Vedic tradition, with its distinct social structure, sacred texts, and rituals, can be seen as part of this long and multifaceted transformation. By the 13th century before the Common Era, the late Harappan cultures had given way to new cultural formations. The defining features of the urban Indus world, planned cities, standardized script, large-scale trade, had receded into memory. Yet the legacy of the civilization lived on in the agricultural systems, craft techniques, settlement patterns, and symbolic motifs that persisted in various forms across northern and western India. The late Harappan period reminds us that the end of a civilization is rarely a final act. It is more often a transition, a reworking of knowledge, belief, and social structure under new circumstances. The people who lived during this time were not simply remnants of a vanished empire. They were the stewards of its memory and the architects of what would come next. By the close of the late Harappan period, the cultural landscape of northwestern South Asia was undergoing a quiet but significant transformation. The cities of the Indus Valley had long since faded, and in their place stood a mosaic of rural communities, regional cultures, and slowly evolving traditions. Into this fragmented world, new groups began to arrive, Indo-Aryan speaking peoples whose migrations would profoundly reshape the social, linguistic, and religious character of the Indian subcontinent. The Indo-Aryans were part of a larger Indo-European linguistic family whose members included the speakers of ancient Greek, Latin, Persian, and the Celtic languages, among others. Sometime during the second millennium before the Common Era, a branch of these Indo-Aryan speakers entered South Asia from Central Asia. Their route likely passed through the mountain passes of present-day Afghanistan and into the northwestern plains of the subcontinent. This movement did not occur as a single, overwhelming invasion, but rather as a gradual process, spanning centuries, marked by waves of migration, cultural interaction, and regional settlement. The arrival of these groups is documented not through monumental ruins or inscriptions, but through the linguistic and cultural traces preserved in the Rig Veda, the earliest known Indo-Aryan text. Composed in early Vedic Sanskrit, the Rig Veda is a collection of hymns dedicated to various deities. composed by priest poets and transmitted orally across generations. It reflects the worldview, values, and societal structures of the Indo-Aryan pastoral communities as they settled and adapted to life in the northwestern plains. The early Vedic people were semi-nomadic, pastoralist communities who relied heavily on cattle herding, supplemented by limited agriculture. Their social organization was tribal and kin-based, centered around clans or lineages known as janas. Authority was exercised by chieftains or tribal leaders, often advised by councils of elders and guided by priests who conducted rituals and preserved sacred knowledge. The Vedic economy was simple, but it gradually became more complex as these groups settled more permanently and began cultivating land more extensively. As they entered the Punjab region and the upper Indus basin, the Indo-Aryans came into contact with the existing populations, descendants of the Harappan civilization and other indigenous groups. This interaction was not a one-sided replacement. Instead, it appears to have been a dynamic process of cultural fusion, adaptation, and selective adoption. While the Rigveda reflects a strong sense of tribal identity and differentiation from non-Vedic peoples, it also contains linguistic and cultural elements that suggest integration and exchange. For example, many non-Indo-European words in early Sanskrit, particularly those related to agriculture, crafts, and local flora and fauna, are believed to have been borrowed from pre-existing languages of the region, possibly related to the Harappan linguistic substrate. Likewise, some Vedic deities and ritual concepts show similarities to earlier South Asian traditions, indicating a degree of continuity beneath the surface of cultural change. One of the most profound shifts during this time was the movement of the center of cultural and economic activity from the Indus basin to the Ganges-Yamuna plain. The eastern regions offered abundant fertile land, supported by the alluvial soils of the Ganges river system. As rainfall patterns shifted and the old Harappan urban centers declined, the focus of settlement gradually shifted eastward. This transition marked the beginning of what historians call the Indo-Gangetic phase of Indian civilization. The expansion into the Ganges plain required adaptation. The Indo-Aryans moved from their pastoral lifestyle toward a more agrarian society. Settlements became more permanent, and tools for clearing forests and cultivating new lands became widespread. Iron, which began to appear in the archaeological record during this time, played a critical role in enabling this agricultural expansion. The ability to forge durable plowshares and axes allowed communities to open up dense forested areas along the Ganges, transforming them into fields and villages. Alongside these economic and geographic changes, social structures began to evolve. The tribal order described in the Rigveda gradually gave way to more hierarchical systems. The early Varna system, 4 broad social categories, began to crystallize. Brahmins, priests, Kshatriyas, warriors, Vaishyas, traders and farmers, and Shudras, laborers and servants. Although still fluid in the earliest texts, this system would later become more rigid and codified in Vedic literature, laying the foundation for the complex caste system that would define much of Indian social history. Religious life also took on new forms. The Vedic deities, such as Indra, god of war and storms, Agni, god of fire, and Varuna, guardian of cosmic order, reflected a worldview centered around natural forces, ritual power, and the moral order known as Rita. Sacrificial rituals, or yajnas, performed by Brahmins were central to Vedic religion. These rituals maintained harmony between humans and the divine, and they reinforced social hierarchy and communal identity. However, the ritualistic Vedic religion was not static. Over time, questions emerged about the nature of the universe, the soul, and ultimate reality. These philosophical inquiries would give rise to the early Upanishads, texts that marked a departure from ritualism toward introspective and metaphysical thought. Although this intellectual development came somewhat later, its roots were planted in the evolving social and religious environment of the early Indo-Gangetic settlements. The shift from the Indus to the Ganges was more than a geographic reorientation. It marked the beginning of a new civilizational chapter. The Indo-Aryan settlements, shaped by both continuity and change, laid the groundwork for early Indian kingdoms, philosophical schools, and religious traditions. Yet, even as they moved eastward, the memory and legacy of the Indus Valley civilization remained embedded in the cultural soil. Craft traditions, agricultural techniques, and perhaps even certain social institutions inherited from Harappan ancestors quietly persisted beneath the surface of the new Vedic world. The emphasis on cleanliness, water rituals, and sacred spaces, so prominent in Harappan cities, found echoes in the Vedic concern for purity, sacred rivers, and fire altars. Though the languages and rituals changed, the threads of continuity suggest that the past was never fully abandoned. In this way, the migration of the Indo-Aryans and the development of Vedic culture did not signal a rupture, but a transformation. A new synthesis emerged, one that would shape Indian identity for millennia to come. The epic narratives, philosophical inquiries, and social institutions that arose in this period continue to inform South Asian culture, religion, and thought to this day. For thousands of years, the cities of the Indus Valley lay buried beneath layers of earth and time, forgotten by history and obscured by silence. Unlike the pyramids of Egypt or the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the ruins of Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and other Indus settlements left no monumental records, no grand texts, and no living tradition that remembered their names. It was only in the 19th century, through a series of accidental discoveries and systematic excavations, that the story of one of the world's earliest urban civilizations began to re-emerge. The rediscovery of the Indus Valley civilization was not the result of a single moment of revelation, but a gradual process involving British colonial officials, Indian laborers, and pioneering archaeologists. It unfolded in tandem with the expansion of the railway system in British India, during which ancient bricks were often uncovered during construction and reused in the building of tracks. These bricks, uniform in size and baked to a hardness unusual for local traditions, caught the attention of a few curious minds. The first major clue came in the 1820s, when Charles Masson, a British deserter-turned-explorer, wandered through the Punjab region and recorded ancient mounds near the town of Harappa. Masson described baked bricks, the remains of walls, and various antiquities, but he had no way of knowing that he had stumbled upon the ruins of a lost civilization. His notes, though limited, were among the earliest written observations of Harappan remains. Several decades later, in the 1850s, Alexander Cunningham, often called the father of Indian archaeology, visited Harappa as part of his broader survey of ancient Indian sites. Like Masson before him, Cunningham noticed the massive brick mounds and recovered a number of artifacts, including a small seal bearing unfamiliar symbols. However, lacking broader context and comparative data, he misidentified the site as being from a later period, possibly connected to the Mauryan Empire. The true antiquity of Harappa remained unrecognized. It was not until the early 20th century that serious efforts to understand these mysterious ruins began in earnest. In the 1920s, under the direction of John Marshall, the Archaeological Survey of India initiated full-scale excavations at Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. These investigations, led in the field by Indian archaeologists like Daya Ramsani and R.D. Banerjee, quickly revealed something extraordinary. Beneath the soil lay the remains of a complex, well-planned urban civilization far older than anyone had expected. At Mohenjo-Daro, located in what is now southern Pakistan, archaeologists uncovered wide streets laid out in a grid pattern, sophisticated drainage systems, large public baths, and uniform brick construction. Harappa, situated further north, displayed similar features. The artifacts recovered, pottery, tools, weights, seals, and figurines, pointed to a level of organization, craftsmanship, and cultural uniformity on par with the civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia. The most striking discovery was the widespread use of an undeciphered script. Seals bearing short inscriptions in this script were found in abundance, indicating a system of administration and identity. Though the meaning of these symbols remained unknown, their regularity and context suggested a literate society with a shared symbolic tradition. In 1924, John Marshall published a report announcing the discovery of a previously unknown civilization that had flourished in the Indus Valley during the third millennium before the Common Era. The revelation stunned the academic world. Until that point, it had been widely assumed that early civilization in South Asia began with the Vedic period, associated with Indo-Aryan speakers and the composition of the Rig Veda. The discovery of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro pushed the timeline of South Asian urbanism back by more than 1,000 years and introduced a sophisticated culture whose language, religion, and institutions were utterly unfamiliar. Over the following decades, excavations expanded to other sites: Kalibangan in Rajasthan, Lothal in Gujarat, Dholavira in Kutch, and Mehrgarh in Haryana, among others. These digs revealed that the Indus Valley civilization was not confined to 2 or 3 cities, but was a vast network of over 1,000 settlements stretching from the edge of the Iranian plateau to the Ganges-Yamuna basin and from the foothills of the Himalayas to the Arabian Sea. Each new site added to the understanding of the civilization's complexity and reach. Lothal, with its dockyard and warehouses, confirmed the maritime dimension of Indus trade. Dholavira, with its unique stone architecture and water management systems, revealed regional diversity within a unified cultural framework. Inland villages and craft centers provided insight into rural life, resource production, and the connections between urban cores and their hinterlands. The rediscovery of the Indus Valley civilization also sparked international interest. Scholars from around the world began to examine the connections between the Indus and its contemporaries in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Central Asia. Mesopotamian texts referencing a place called Meluha were reinterpreted as possible references to the Indus region. The presence of Indus seals in Sumerian cities and Mesopotamian artifacts in Indus settlements confirmed that this ancient civilization had been part of the larger Bronze Age world. One of the enduring mysteries that emerged from these excavations was the undeciphered script. Despite decades of effort, no bilingual inscriptions or long texts have been found that might provide a key to understanding it. The brevity of the inscriptions and the absence of a known linguistic descendant have made the task exceptionally difficult. Nevertheless, the script remains a central focus of Indus research and a powerful symbol of the civilization's complexity. In addition to archaeological discoveries, the 20th century saw advances in scientific techniques that deepened knowledge of the Indus world. Radiocarbon dating allowed for more accurate chronologies. Satellite imagery revealed the courses of ancient rivers and the full extent of settlement networks. Geological and paleo-environmental studies provided new data on climate change and its role in the civilization's decline. These tools helped move the study of the Indus Valley from descriptive archaeology to a more interdisciplinary and dynamic field. Importantly, Indian and Pakistani scholars played a central role in this rediscovery. As the field matured, archaeologists, historians, linguists, and environmental scientists from across South Asia contributed to new interpretations and research. Sites were protected, museums were established, and efforts were made to engage the public with the deep antiquity of the region. The Indus Valley civilization, once lost to history, became a vital part of national and cultural identity for both India and Pakistan. In the later 20th and early 21st centuries, the exploration of new sites, including Rediscovery in Haryana, now considered one of the largest known Harappan cities, has further expanded the understanding of the civilization's size and complexity. Advanced technologies such as ground-penetrating radar, isotope analysis, and genetic studies continue to offer new insights into the lives of the people who built and inhabited these ancient cities. The rediscovery of the Indus Valley civilization has not only rewritten the history of South Asia, it has reshaped the broader narrative of human development. It reminds us that civilization is not a linear path, but a web of experiments, adaptations, and forgotten brilliance. The story of the Indus, once buried and silent, now stands as a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of the ancient world.